Welcome to today's webinar about making sustainability visible and why that matters. I'm Kathy Kuntz, the Executive Director of Cool Choices, and I'm delighted you could join me today for this webinar. As a bit of background for those of you who might not be familiar with us, Cool Choices is a nonprofit. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin, and we implement sustainability programs that help industry leaders engage their workforces across a business or a whole community of businesses around sustainability to transform culture so that sustainable practices are the new normal. And that means we spend a lot of time thinking about what motivates people to change their practices and what doesn't motivate them to change their practices. And all of this becomes increasingly important as we're in this moment where really for you as a sustainability professional, you know, I kind of think of this analogy that you've been on this amazing bike journey and accomplished all of these road miles. And what we are saying to you now is that was great. You need to go much further, much faster now. And that's your quest, is to ratchet up sustainability, whether it's in your community or in your organization. And so it becomes really important to think about how everyone in the organization plays a role in making that happen, how you engage everyone in being part of the solution. And that's how we get to this issue of visibility being important, because if you want to engage everyone, it's really important to understand what motivates human beings. And human beings are social creatures, okay? If you think about any kind of aspect of your life, the reality is there are all kinds of social cues that tell us how to behave in that situation. Whether we're talking about a moment where you're watching your favorite team in a national championship, or you know, achieving a degree, or participating in a wedding, or attending a funeral, or participating in a networking event, there are social cues that tell you how to behave in each of those situations, and your behavior is different in each of those situations. And so when we want to influence what people are doing, we need to think about how social cues work and how to leverage them for what we do. And you know, this isn't just for like social things you do. This affects all kinds of decisions. One of the interesting places where we've done good research on this is around solar power. So it turns out that homes in a neighborhood where someone has installed photovoltaics have higher likelihood of installing photovoltaics themselves. Essentially, solar power is contagious. It's more contagious when the panels are positioned so that you can see them from the street. The way that when people see this is what people like us in our neighborhood are doing, they become more open to doing this too. That's a social cue in a sense. It's not an intentional cue necessarily, but solar is a great example of where in the sustainability space, we've a successful example of how a technology can cue other people to adopt that technology. For the record, that's our system. That would be me standing there by it. In any case, one of the ways that visibility, that kind of those social cues become really important then, is to think about your role as a leader. Another thing we know from the research is that leaders who walk the talk are more compelling than leaders who don't. There was recently some research, again, looking at solar installations. So community organizers who had solar panels on their own homes recruited 63% more households to install solar panels than their counterparts who did not have solar panels. You know, we're not only do we follow cues, but we're really always looking for consistency. So a leader who says, do what I do, is much more compelling than a leader who says, do this thing, I can't be bothered to do it. So part of what I really want you to think about in terms of this visibility is that everything you do is potentially a visible cue to the others in your organization about what they should do. That's the first way you can really kind of ump the ante here, is to make sure that you are walking the talk in visible ways. There is, though, a bigger challenge with this. Social cues are really important. It's really important that people can see what other people are doing. When it comes to sustainability, there's just one kind of huge problem. And that's that a lot of the things each of us do as individuals to be more sustainable, whether they're these kind of household things I've got here, or even some of the things we do in our workspaces, are largely invisible to the people around us. So unless I have cause to tell you, you don't know if I turn off the water when I brush my teeth. You don't know if my thermostat sets down when no one's home in our house. And I don't know those things about you. It's really difficult to use things as social cues if people can't see them. Part of your quest in everything you do in sustainability should be to think about how you make these invisible actions more visible. Essentially, part of your job is to shine a spotlight on the good stuff that's happening so that it can be contagious. The social cues only work when they're cues. So if people are doing good things and no one ever notices that they're doing those good things can't spread. And sometimes you have to be really clever about how you make sure that things are visible. My favorite example of this is one that I learned from social marketers. It's an old story. So this is about a suburban community in Ohio, where a relatively affluent community where there was concern that as young people got their driver's licenses and their first vehicles, they weren't using their seatbelts. So the community was really concerned. They knew that, how it works is if drivers adopt wearing seatbelts when they start driving, they tend to continue to wear seatbelts. And vice versa. If they don't wear them initially, it's harder to get them to wear seatbelts. So they were really concerned about how do we get young people in our community to wear their seatbelts. And the chief of police said, leave it to me. So about a week later, one day, at the local high school gets out. So students are kind of, moving out to the parking lot, getting into their vehicles, and driving away for the day. As they leave the parking lot, there are a couple of squad cars, and the squad cars pull a few students over. So what happens in a case like this is there are, two students pulled over, Bill and Ann, and, lots of other students driving by in their cars noticing that. Now, the story is a little old. It shows how long I've been doing this work. It's probably the 90s because kids in those cars don't have cell phones. So Bill and Ann get home from school, and as soon as they walk in the door, their landlines are ringing, and it's their friends wondering what happened. What kind of a ticket did you get? How big was the fine? Are you going to lose your car over it? And Bill laughs when he gets these questions. He says, oh, no, you've got it all wrong. The cops stopped me because I was wearing my seatbelt. He thanked me and he gave me free movie passes. Didn't he stop you? What happens in that story is the police do a terrific job of making the good practice get noticed. Now, how they proceeded from there, and this is important, is they didn't have patrol cars every day outside the school, but periodically there might be a patrol car there, and it would stop and reward students who were doing the right thing. Seatbelt use increased dramatically. It was a huge community success. The police very effectively made the good practice visible and rewarded it in a way that made other people want to do that practice too. And I want to give you a kind of second way of thinking about this story, because I think there's just so many ways you could apply this and make good practices visible in your own organizations. Often one of the pet peeves that green teams will talk to us about is that people leave their computers and certainly their monitors or their desk lamps on at the end of the day. They don't shut off stuff as they leave. So to make doing the right thing visible, the strategy I always suggest is what you do is you come in early one morning with a bag of candy. And at every desk where things are turned off, you leave some candy. No notes, nothing else, just candy. People will come into the office. There will be candy at some desks, not candy at other desks. Conversation will ensue. And based on, so then maybe, 10 o'clock, you send out an email. Hey, props to everybody who remembered to turn off their computers last night. I left people treats for that. I really appreciate it. Suddenly it's really visible who's doing the right thing. You're making it more noticeable when people are doing what you want them to do. And there are a variety of ways to sort of create that notice. You can do something dramatic like this. The other thing I should say, though, before I leave that, is if you did the candy, you would never do the candy 2 days in a row. You're not paying people to turn things off. That's a different webinar about incentives, that we don't like paying people to do the things we want them to do, because that's not intrinsic motivation. You're randomly rewarding them and calling them out in a way that gets them noticed. Okay? So you're highlighting those good practices in a way that makes them visible so that they can be social cues for others. And there are a variety of ways you can do this. The simplest way, perhaps, is to encourage people to catch people doing the right thing and then share that back with you. And I'll sort of give you 2 ways to think about that. We're in this unique moment in time now where everyone on your team has a camera in their pocket. So it's really easy to catch an image of someone doing the right thing and shoot you an email with that image. You could have a page on the intranet where you store those. Maybe occasionally you buy a cup of coffee for somebody who sent in an image and the person in the image, something. But you're creating that space, importantly, where you're sharing evidence, social cues. Here are the people doing the right thing. Another great example of this that was shared with me just last week by Doug at Montgomery County. So they've developed this flyer that's available both in paper and electronic format that people can send to other people to recognize them for what they're doing. And part of what Doug told me about the flyer is that when people get it in paper form, sometimes even when they get the email, they'll print it out and hang it up in their cubicles. It's a kind of badge of what they've done. You're helping them make visible the good things they're doing. Ultimately, you're providing recognition. And that recognition is that visibility that people need to make something go forward. When I talk about recognition, I always like to show these photos. This is from a law firm we worked with a number of years ago. And at the firm, every week, someone was identified as the cool chooser of the week, and they got their photo taken with this trophy. They didn't get to keep the trophy. They just got their photo taken, and then their photo was on the company intranet, on the front page of the intranet for the week. And I want you to look at how happy these folks are about this recognition. It's kind of like they won the 3rd grade spelling bee or something. Pretty compelling. That's what you want. That's a social cue. Look at how Mary is walking the sustainable walk. And, partly it's important to really understand what happens when you do recognition. So I want to kind of talk through what I like to call kind of the virtuous circle of recognition. So in an organization, you call out Tom for doing a terrific job recycling. Okay, that's the initial recognition. There are two outcomes that come from that. First, other people, in my example, Alice, goes, oh, I recycle. I must need to do it more so that Kathy notices me next time. So there are outward ripple effects. Essentially, other people see that Tom got recognition and they strive to do the practice to get recognition too. The other thing that happens, though, that I think we don't spend enough time appreciating is that when we call out Tom, when we say Tom is a terrific recycler, Tom feels a certain amount of internal pressure. He's a human being and he wants to be viewed as a consistent person. He feels pressure to live up to that recognition. So Tom now does a better job recycling than he did before because he wants to really, if anybody notices what he's doing, he wants to be sure that they know that he totally deserved that recognition he got from Kathy. And that just continues to multiply then. So now you've got the opportunity to recognize Tom and Alice, which deepens their own commitments to that and motivates more people, Jim and Dwayne, to shift their action because we're making this visible. We're saying, this is what we want people to do. This is a good thing. And more people are doing it. Now, a really important thing to remember here is that you always want to be promoting, and there's a question about this. You always want to be promoting the right practices. Okay, we're social creatures. If you tell us something is what everyone does, it's what we're going to do. So in the environmental realm, we have this tendency of sort of throwing out these statistics that we think are so horrifying they will change everyone's practices, like 9 out of 10 plastic water bottles aren't recycled. Well, newsflash, that does not change anyone's practices except that sort of cohort that's exactly like you who's horrified by it. For regular folks, when you say 9 out of 10 bottles aren't recycled, they think, well, then it's really not that big of a deal if I don't recycle this one. There's a famous social marketer, Cialdini, who shares this story about one of his graduate students being at the petrified forest, and there were signs at the petrified forest, please do not steal the petrified wood. We're running out of wood because everyone keeps stealing it. And this graduate student was horrified that his fiancée read the sign and immediately picked up a piece of wood and slipped it into her bag. He's like, what are you doing? She said, well, we need to get our share. Don't encourage the wrong practices. So instead of talking about 9 out of 10 plastic water bottles aren't recycled, talk about a norm that leads people where you want them to go. 70% of Americans support recycling. You should recycle too. Be really cautious that you're always doing this in a way that reinforces good behavior, that makes good behavior more visible so that it's a social cue to others about what they should do. And ultimately, I've sort of used, I know I've talked about this kind of example before. Seth Godin talks about people like us do things like this. That in a certain way, we're always trying to create an affinity group, a tribe of people who share our identity. And so if you think about that, people like us do things like this. We have to see the things like this to know that people like us do them. So this visibility piece is really core, and it is really a challenge around sustainability because so often the things we want people to do, other people don't necessarily see. People can see PV panels, but they can't see the insulation in the walls of a home. They can't see the driving habits that someone adopts. So really, this quest of yours, part of it is to always think about, how do I make the good things people are doing visible so that it's part of that shared identity of a group? To give you another example of where visibility can be really powerful, and that's around commitment. So often in the sustainability realm, we think, oh, well, we'll do a program where people commit to reduce their waste or save energy or whatever. And commitments can be really powerful, but commitments are powerful when they're visible. Okay, if you have me make an anonymous pledge that I'm not going to eat junk food, it is not going to change what I eat whatsoever, because nobody's going to hold me accountable to it. I probably won't even remember I made the pledge. But alternatively, if you have me commit publicly that I'm going to make an effort to exercise more or use my bike more than I use my car in the next month, and I make that commitment in a way that people I know and care about can see I made that commitment, so I make it in a public way. And I think, all of you think about how important workplaces and collegial relationships are to us. So if I make that commitment in front of my colleagues that I'm going to bike more than I drive to work, I'm going to try really hard to fulfill that commitment. That's now visible, and whether or not I do it reflects on the kind of person I am. So even on the days when I have a pretty good reason for driving, I'm going to think really hard about it, because I don't want the folks I work with to notice that I drove today and go, wow, way to not fulfill your commitment. Being visible is incredibly important here. So always be thinking about, how do I make it visible where people are doing the right things so that other people can see those cues. And just maybe as a final example of this, our own system does this. So we put people on teams and they play a game, and really the whole point of the game is to create an excuse for people to share with the people around them what they're doing to be sustainable. Okay, the game is a construct to get people sharing and talking about what they do to be sustainable. Because if I can get people to share and talk about those things, the incidence of sustainable practices will go up. People will feel like the people around them also care about these things. They'll feel more empowered to do things. The core of this is visibility, giving people opportunity to share what they're doing and be congratulated for that in a way that can spread that. So really thinking about how making things visible helps you make them contagious. And more than anything, what we need is for sustainable practices to be contagious, for commitments to sustainability to be contagious. Hence this kind of fixation, let's say I have a fixation with sustainability and being visible. And so really thinking about how important visibility is there. And with that, I want to open things up for questions. We have about 8 minutes. So there was a question, I think I largely answered this. Yes, you want to reward the right behaviors rather than punishing or shaming around the bad behaviors, because you don't want to draw attention to the wrong social cues. And maybe a related thing there to think about is, sometimes in organizations, folks will say, well, the bad practices are so prevalent, there are bad cues everywhere. I'm not sure where I even could find the positive things to recognize. And I think it's really important to kind of meet your audience where they are and to celebrate whatever small victories there are, and know that those victories will accumulate into bigger victories. So maybe initially it's a victory that someone is using the recycling bin kind of thing. and maybe that can lead you to more recognition and ultimately to a zero waste place that you really want to be at, kind of piece. So second question here, I talked about making sustainability part of the shared identity, which is the culture of the company. Where do you start? Oops, sorry. As the questions come in, it moves them around in this really. Where do you start if there is no reference to sustainability at all? So even where there's no reference, I would argue again that there are probably some good practices. And I would maybe think about where there are things that you do that reflect an ethic that we don't waste things. So we're in the Midwest, and while there isn't always uniform enthusiasm for taking action on climate change, as Midwesterners, we're pretty pragmatic and we don't like wasting things. So I start with that shared value of we're the kind of people who don't waste things. Our grandmothers reused tinfoil. Let's talk about how we live that culture that we're in. So leveraging off of what is. There are typically some core set of practices that I think you can showcase and build upon in those kinds of situations. What are some best examples of visible, sustainable behavior becoming pervasive and persistent in a community or company? So, you know, I think about some of the organizations we've worked with over time. One of our very first partners was Myron Construction, a commercial construction firm, and I remember one of the VPs there telling me, I don't know, probably a year after our engagement with Myron, that they'd been adding a number of new staff, and at a recent meeting, he said people were leaving the room, and one of the newer people tossed something into a trash bin, and another employee stopped him and went, "That was recycling. That's not what we do at Myron. That has to go over there." And I think it's a really powerful example of how people start to own these things, and this is who we are, and they start enforcing them. Particularly powerful to enforce them with new employees. So I'm trying to become part of this group, and they tell me that what they do is this, not this. That's super powerful. I'm going to follow those cues because I want to be accepted into this group. Let me just see if there's more that. It looks like I answered the questions. I would just close then with you've got my email if you have other questions later. Thanks as always for joining me today, and particularly thank you for all the work you do to make sustainability happen in your organization. Clearly we can't do this without you. And have a great week. Thanks so much. Bye.